Hundreds of thousands of years ago, much of the world in the north was covered by vast sheets of ice during a period known as the Devengian. The ice lasted for tens of thousands of years, a kilometre thick in the deepest areas. But slowly and surely, the ice began to retreat. Whether the ice retreated as a result of divine intervention, the rise of proto-civilization, or the cosmos stirring, mattered not, because where there had once been ice, now there was an island. A curious island, irregular, but looking not too dissimilar to a green rabbit sitting upright. Surrounded by three seas, the Great Atlantic to the west, the North Sea to the east, and the Irish Sea, which was between it and another smaller island. A channel to the south separated it from a vast continent. And so, where once there was ice, now there was a small rabbit and an emerald sitting in the North Sea, undiscovered and unexplored. But what would unfold from that tiny island would have a profound influence on the entire world in terms of language, governance, politics, culture, empire and stories, and what stories there would be. But we leave it there for now, because it does not even have a name yet, nor does it have a people. As the ice retreated, civilization would again return, everywhere, and the age of man would begin anew. Over the next 10,000 years, empires would rise and fall. Kings would do anything to retain their bloodline, their power, and their lineage. And 3,000 miles away, in a land called Syria, the king known as Diocletian gathered friends, dignitaries, and his family for a mighty feast. He felt times were changing. They experienced peacetime for too long. When a land has no enemies without, enemies within are created. He would not see his land fall to chaos. At the feast were his 33 daughters. 33, he did not think it too many. And at this feast were other kings, barons, men of influence and wealth, and the king would see his daughters married off to these men. It would solidify his power across a further 33 regions. He studied his eldest, Albina. She was vivacious, beautiful, but tempestuous, with a stubbornness rarely found in a woman. He loved her, but she vexed him all the same. He hoped that once she married, she would soften. Once she submitted to her husband, she would bear many children, and the king many grandchildren. One of them would give him a mighty son who would replace him one day. The king smiled at this thought. Albina was not smiling, and she was also looking at her father. She was her own person. She was not a mere sow to be sold off to the highest bidder and to be turned into a birthing factory. The man to her right was a powerful ruler indeed, but at least twice her age. She found him revolting. His petty attempts at conversation, his fingers lingering on her hand for seconds, she found unbearable. He sensed her unease, and not wishing to displease her father, retreated into himself. This disgusted her further. She was an educated woman, learned by the finest scholars in the land. There was a whole world out there, undiscovered lands. She pined for adventure, and damned if she would be sold off into a life of servitude. She cared little for family or dynasty. The king's smile retreated. He observed his daughter, her standoffishness, her refusal to engage in polite conversation or get to know her future husband. He found it embarrassing, and he would not stand for it. The king stands. An advisor claps his hands twice, and all eyes are on the king. A king who is growing old. He declares that his daughters to be married off, all of them, to the man sitting to the right of them, that there would be a grand wedding the following day. The room erupted in cheer. The sisters looked about nervously, all of them vying to see Albina's eyes. She did not cheer. Her face had not changed since she entered the feast, and an idea was born in her heart. Her eyes dilated. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. The king mistook this for acceptance. He was wrong. That night, with bellies full with wine and food, the husbands-to-be slept within the palace halls of King Diocletian, Albina summoned her sisters. All of them cloaked and veiled under the cover of darkness, Albina schemed and plotted. She told her sisters that this was not the life for them. There were other lands to see, other adventures to be had. Did they simply want to be glorified handmaidens, pumping out children while their supposed noble husbands carried on with the servant girls?
I say thee nay,
Screamed Albina.
each of you kill your husband-to-be, whether with steel or poison, slay him.
Some of the sisters looked around in shock, fear, guilt and terror racing into their little hearts. Albina slapped one of her sisters across her face, leaving a red mark that looked almost wet.
You shall do this, little fool, for the alternative is worse. Easy for you to say, big sister.
Albina looked around at her co-conspirators. She had anticipated this. From the folds of her cloak she produced a sack and dropped it to the floor. It made an uncomfortable sound. Albina untied the knot at the top and shook it from the bottom. The head of the king she had been sat next to at the feast, not a few hours ago, lolled out. His eyes glassy and grey, an abject look on his face as if to say, "How did this happen to me?" One of the sisters went to scream and Albina clasped a hand over her mouth. Confident her sibling would not scream, she withdrew her hand. A bloody smear stained the girl's lower jaw. There was something about this that stirred the others. Even as the night's cool air worked its way into the folds of their cloaks, their blood was up. They had no lust for these men, save for the bloodlust that was now stirring within.
Go to their chambers, kill them, poison them, stab them, run them through. Leave not one of them alive. Meet me by the docks in 2 hours' time. I've friended one of the sailors there who has taken a fancy to me. I have arranged for safe passage out of here, with supplies to last us months. A new world awaits.
And so that night, the remaining 32 sisters went to their chambers of their husbands-to-be, and then before the morning sun, a further 32 future bloodlines were extinguished before they had even begun, in an act of incredible familicide. 33 cloaked shadows, diminutive, hurried through the halls. No servant or guard would question what these women were doing, for were they not the king's daughters? Taking a nervous walk before their great day? They gathered at the dock. The night was disappearing. It would not be long before their crime was discovered. A young sailor awaked, unsure of what exactly was happening, but there was nothing he would not do for Albina. Supplies to last a year, slaves to man the ship. The ship set sail, and even as they were a mile offshore, the sound of alarm was being raised. The young sailor went to the stern of the ship and squinted. Albina slid in behind him. She wrapped one hand around his chest and kissed his ear. Something bit into his neck, cold and sharp, not unlike the woman wielding the dagger. He tried to turn around, but there were hands, lots of them, clawing at him, pushing him. He tumbled backwards off the ship and into the dark Mediterranean Sea. Albina and her crew sailed for many months. The promise of adventure seemed to have waned now. Their supplies were meagre. The slaves worked nearly to death. She wondered if she would have to eat them. Not that there would be much to scavenge. Over the last few weeks she had overheard gossiping amongst some of her sisters. Had they made a mistake? Would there be forgiveness if they returned? They could blame it all on Albina. It's not as if she would be seen or found again. Or perhaps they should bring her back to face her punishments. All Albina knew was if they didn't find land soon, it didn't matter what happened. None of them would live to see adventure or even a trial. They had moved into colder climes now. A great fog danced silently across the waves like the spirits of ancient gods. Were they here to be welcoming her or condemning her? And when the fog finally parted, they saw land. Land and light. They could see cliffs. Cliffs of the purest white. The albedo effect of the sun made it hard to look upon these cliffs for long. Just what sort of land had they discovered? They came across a beach by those magnificent cliffs. Millions of pebbles and stones made up that area. Harsh compared to the sands of her old home. Colder as well. They moved inland, grubby and dirty, hoping to find a town. There were no towns and there were no people, but the land was plentiful with trees, countryside and game. She scooped up a handful of pebbles, earth and seaweed. If no people belonged to this land, then by birthright the land belonged to her, and she declared this land to be called Albion, even as the soil and stone drained between her fingers. The princess was now the queen, and the first order of her kingdom was to eat. They traversed into a forest that seemed to go on for miles. A small animal hopped near Queen Albina. Small, fluffy with long ears, docile. The two of them looked at each other, having never seen each other's species before. Albina picked up a rock and brought it down on the fragile creature, killing it instantly. She picked the broken thing up and bit into it, going through fur, flesh and bone. She found this strangely satisfying. Albina noticed that there were more of them now, dozens in fact, and she knew her sisters were no longer squeamish about such acts. She commanded her sisters to catch these small things. The creatures were small and ignorant, but they learned fast that this new upright animal was yet another predator, and they fled these women. The women gathered acorn and apples. They scoured the beaches for crabs. The princesses that were now the monarchy of the wild. And yet, while the rivers were filled with fish, they were not fishermen. While game was plentiful, they were not hunters. Life was not as it was. Dresses of the finest silk was torn, ripped and dirty. The sisters now favouring the cloaks from that fateful night. And whilst this undiscovered country was beautiful and green, much of the landscape unsettled them. There was ancient power and magic where there should have been people. The forest felt unnatural at night. On one afternoon, as the day began to turn to dusk, one of the sisters was walking through a meadow carrying berries. In the long grass there was a white horse laying on the floor with its back to her. It looked magnificent. She moved closer. Perhaps she could tempt it with some of her berries, tame it. The first domesticated horse in all of Albion. The horse turned its head towards her. The eyes were large, bulbous, close together rather than at the sides. A pug nose sat between those eyes rather than at the end of the snout, and it was grinning at her. Its entire face had a human hybrid-like quality about it. Human one. The words seemed to come from the horse and envelop her. Goose flesh exploded across her body and she felt cold in a cold land. It got up on its hind legs and she could see it had intentions that were profane. She turned tail and ran as fast as she could back through that untended meadow, through the darkening forest, through branches and overgrown thistle. Even as she reached the sanctuary of her sisters in a clearing they had made, deep within the forest, she could still hear that leering voice echoing after her. That night the sisters huddled like a group of wretched flightless birds for warmth and comfort. They were tired and hungry and filled with a longing in their loins. And in the dead of night, the forest began to speak to them. Eyes appeared in the dark, white and yellow and red. There was chattering noises around them, clicks, growls and voices that sounded vaguely human. Not vague but distorted, a mocking imitation of what a man should sound like. It was too dark to see anything save for those eyes, and then a great light appeared like a dark fireball. Growing larger and closer, it was too much to look at directly, but there was something within that dark light, the shape of something humanoid. Whether that light distorted the shape was unknown, but light was enough to illuminate the owners of the other eyes. Terrible creatures stood before them. Some were entirely hairless, with a dull grey skin as if made from a crude pot of clay. Bulbous heads with small eyes and a slit where a mouth should be. Others seemed to be a terrible blend of man and beast. There was a terrible wolf with a single blood red eye, and the ground hissed and smoked beneath its footpads. The white horse was also there. Creatures that resembled a mass of tentacles with a human face within the centre. And in the middle of it all was that figure bathed in a dying light. It stood tall, pale as if all the blood had been exsanguinated. Short, fat horns protruded from the temples, above eyes that were ink black. Below those horns were ears that resembled that of a donkey, and snakes crawled out of those ears and dropped onto the floor. The head was engulfed in crimson fire. It stood naked before them, save for a rudimentary cloth around its waist, with chest hair that resembled barbed wire. Below that chest was another face where a stomach should be. Small human legs were being devoured within the mouth that was there. This creature stepped forward, and Albina stepped forwards to meet it, even as this hellish menagerie surrounded her siblings. There was terror amongst the women, but there was also something else. Desire. Something they had not felt since that last night in Syria. The creatures descended on Albina's sisters. Some allowed themselves to be taken willingly, some did not. But it did not stop these demons nonetheless. The being grabbed Albina by both her arms and threw her to the floor. Hours later, and the sun was beginning to rise over the forest. There were no creatures, no possible beasts, no nightmares walking in the reality of waking life. The sisters survived their night, but there was a terrible sickness amongst them all. As the weeks progressed, the sickness did not slow down, it increased. They were showing signs of heavy pregnancy. Horrible dark veins sat across extended bellies, bellies that writhed like bags of water with overcrowded fish. But despite this, something prevented those stomachs from popping like overripe fruit. Some hidden power beneath the earth, untapped, waiting to be mined. After 9 months, they all gave birth on the same day. Several children spilled out of each sister, male and female alike. Though they looked human for the most part, they had a brutish look about them, even at such a tender age. The sisters survived their ordeal, and the children suckled at their mothers greedily. The children grew quickly. Within the first year, most of them were larger than a fully grown man. From humans and devils, the giants of Albion had established themselves. By the time the children had reached adulthood, most of them were 20 cubits or more. They mined the land, they built fortresses and made strange temples. They created forges and melted down gold to create great idols of bulls, swans and dragons which they worshipped. Each giant controlled a portion of the land from the southernmost tip to the even colder north. They bred with each other, and despite their prodigious strength and keen intellect, rivalries were fierce that would shake the land itself. Of those giants that died, their bones would become chalk and their flesh returned to hay. But their numbers replenished as quickly as they diminished. Who could challenge them? Who would challenge them? The giants of Albion were the rulers of the land and would rule it for over a millennium. One day a mighty giant, the mightiest of them all, made his way back to a cave he had made out of a cliff. He pulled a rope that several dead deer were tethered to. Inside was a giant fire, and he hung his day's hunt up inside. At the back of the cave, a small shadow flickered. In a straw bed was a woman, but she was no giant. The mother of this giant, Albina, Queen of Albion. She was old now, old and dying. She'd lived a dozen lifetimes. Despite the giant's ferocious nature, he took great care of his mother. She looked at him and smiled through lips that were now as grey as her hair, whispering his name.
Gog, my son.
The story of Albina is a medieval origin legend created to explain how Britain, then called Albion, got its name and where the giants of British mythology came from. First known appearance of Albina is an Anglo-Norman poem called De Grands Gains of the Great Giants, written around the year 1333. The story itself serves as a kind of prequel to the arrival of Brutus of Troy, the legendary founder of Britain. It also serves as a sequel to Geoffrey of Monmouth's influential Historiam Regum Britanniae. Geoffrey describes Brutus arriving in Britain, encountering the giants, but it was never explained where the giants came from or why the island was originally called Albion. The story has often been described as a variation, as in some iterations the giants of Albion were considered to be the descendants of the Greek god Poseidon, and Albion was the largest of his sons who founded Britain. Whichever version a person prefers to entertain, there have always been talks of giants within Britain. The story of Albina also sets up the introduction of Gogmagog, the chieftain and largest of the giants and a direct descendant of Albina herself. Their unusual size and strength explained away by the fact that they are born of demonic fathers and human mothers. The name Albion also appears in ancient Greek texts as early as the 4th century BC, used to distinguish itself from Ireland, known then as Irene. It was said that the Greek geographers and Roman writers likely received the name from the Gauls or Celts. The term Latinized as Albion, appearing in works by Ptolemy and Pliny. The root of the word may trace back further to Proto-Indo-European word albo, meaning white, which aligns with the Latin albus and the Greek alphos, reflecting the white cliffs of Dover, the first thing Albina sees upon her discovering the land. And while the story of Albina is mythic and poetic, it should be noted that the name Albion did not originate as an ancient name for Britain, but likely inspired by the island's famous white cliffs. Over time, Albion has become a poetic and literary name for Britain today, evoking the ancient and legendary identity of Britain. The word Albion is still used today, place names for examples: Alba in the Scottish Gaelic, Albane for the Irish, and even Alban for the Welsh. The word is associated with football clubs such as Brighton and Hove Albion, as well as Plymouth Albion. But over time, Albion would become something else and would one day become Great Britain. Some say that was due to the arrival of Brutus of Troy. In part 2 of our season finale, we look into this sequel of Albina, the arrival of Brutus, the eponymous battle between Gogmagog and Corineus, and how giants have played a huge part in British mythology. Next time on Mythic Albion, we will look at how we got from Albina to Albion, to giants to Brutus and to Britain. So until next time, walk wisely and beware those far off ships heading towards our coastline.